Hi, welcome back, and I hope you're enjoying the course so far. In a moment today, we are going to go and change the scenery a little bit and go into the studio to photograph a model. And when I say model today, it's actually a friend of mine rather than a professional model. And whereas the difference between working with professional models and with friends or family is massive. I mean, professional models, they make your life so much easier. I do recommend that you start with friends and family, and the reasons are twofold. The first reason is that if you're not used to photographing people, you need kind of to hone your skills in directing. So asking people to pose or to basically have a certain expression. So you need to practice that. And the second reason is purely financial. Professional models are very expensive, and if you shoot specifically for stock, it might take a while for you to recover the money you invested due to the low royalties that I mentioned earlier. Also, nobody can guarantee that your images will sell, so you might end up just working at a loss if you hire professional models for every single shoot to do. In the previous segment, we discussed compositional techniques, and in this segment, we'll talk more about camera settings that will help increase the value of your work, so things that you can do in camera to improve that. But also, I believe that it's the right time to talk about model and property releases. Now, as we discussed earlier, all identifiable people in your files, in your images, if not in an editorial situation, they have to sign a model release before you upload your image, that is. So, but what are they releases? It's important that you understand them very well, because you need to make clear to the model what they are signing for. And model releases are legal contracts between the model and the photographer, which state that the model understands that their image might be used, basically sold through an agency, and it can be used and manipulated without the photographer, model, or the agency being consulted beforehand. There are restrictions, of course, in regards to sensitive use. And for instance, your images cannot be used for defamatory or pornographic uses, and so the model is protected already from the agency point of view, but it's important that you mention that as well to them. There are two types of model releases. One is for adults and the other one for minors. And the only difference between them is that when shooting minors, their releases must be signed by a legal guardian rather than themselves, and that's in the specified field for that. Now, whereas that sounds simple enough, it's important that you reinforce to models that you have no control over who is going to be buying and using their images. And that essentially means that they might find their face being used for causes that they don't necessarily agree with. And in my experience, models will sign a model release but will rarely read it. So it's your job to ensure that they know what they are signing for, even though it's their responsibility to read it. Make sure you clarify exactly what you're signing for. So what I like to do is ask them to sign a model release before the shoot. I first call them and explain what I mentioned, and in plain and simple English without the legal jargons. And after that, in an email, I attach the blank model release to be signed, and in the body of the email, I write exactly what I just mentioned, that I have no control over who the buyer will be and where the images will be used. I also state that this might include causes they don't agree with. So I put that in the body of the email, so they just understand what's involved really and what the risks are. You can ask the model to bring this release signed on the day of the shoot, or to sign it just before the shoot as well. But make sure that you also have blank releases with you, just in case there's any typos or anything you need to change before the shoot. You also need a third-party person a third person rather, to sign the release as a witness. So this can be your assistant or anyone that's around the shoot that witnesses the model signing the release and say, well, no, this actually happened, it's legal. Now, an alternative to model releases, to paper model releases, are model release apps. So these apps allow you to have all parties sign the release straight onto your smartphone or tablet, and you can email yourself the final contract as a PDF, so that kind of speeds things up a little bit more. There is a field in the model release called shoot description, and that's there because model releases are shoot specific, meaning that you need to ask the model to sign a new one for each shoot. Now, this is done to protect the model mainly, so that photographers are not legally allowed to photograph them in each future situation after they sign the first model release. So I can easily see how this can lead to a stalking situation. So that's that clause there, so they need to sign a new one for each shoot. Now, all these remarks might sound a little scary, but I believe that it's better to be completely clear in writing than to have models coming back to you after the damage is done, after the shoot, claiming that they were not really clear on what they were signing for, what the model release meant. In the course notes, I'm including a generic model release that I use and that all agencies that I contribute to accept. So this release is based on the release of the most successful stock photographer ever, Yuri Arcurs. I also put the link to his website there and to his release. But this release is supplied free of charge online. All I did was change the details to mine, obviously, and change the layout to match my style, so I put my logo in there. So model releases, for being a legal document, keep on getting updated to reflect changes in law. So you'll be able to find the latest acceptable versions online from different sources, but I do recommend looking at Yuri Arcurs first. Even though it's a bit dated, it's still quite acceptable. You just need to change one or two things. Maybe you can use my release to see what's different there. Now, also, all agencies will supply their own templates, but I do not recommend you use them because they refer to that one specific agency in specific. So that means that you'll not be able to upload that release to any other sites. They'll say, well, that release only is valid for the site that's mentioned here on the release, therefore we cannot use it for our purpose. So it's actually better to have a generic model release that you have rather than another website's template. The next subject we'll discuss is property releases. So it's going to be rather short because, of course, we have discussed model releases already. So property releases, they follow the same principle, except that it protects property rather than models. Now, property releases state that someone's property's images can be sold, manipulated, and used without the owner, photographer, or agency having a say in the client's usage. Again, the same defamatory uses might not be permitted. Yeah. So if you have images that include recognizable property, again, if it's not editorial, you either internally or externally, in fact, you need to have a property signed by its owner. You also need a third person to sign as a witness, the same as the model release, really. By the way, when I say property, it doesn't only apply to houses and buildings, but to any piece of design that is copyrighted. So we discussed that in editorial versus commercial already. So any piece of design that is likely to be copyrighted will need to have a model release, a property release rather, with it. So think, for instance, cars, boats, art pieces even from a private collection, and animals such as pets and racehorses, so they're also properties, so they need property releases. Now, once again, templates for generic property releases can be downloaded from several sources online, but I do recommend that you use Yuri Arcurs because it's just a generic all-round release. And that's pretty much all there is to property release. As you understand, model release, property release is really similar except just for property. In my experience, have never used them. For what I shoot is not really necessary. But if you are doing anything more specialized, maybe that involves properties, or if you have models inside properties, if you're hiring a house to do a shoot in it, you need to make sure that the owner signs a property release, otherwise you might not be able to use the image. And now that we have covered releases, let's go into the studio and shoot my model.